Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Hashim Kumar. Joining us tonight is Iuliia Osmolovska. She's Director, GLOBSEC Kyiv, to discuss Europe's reaction to the high-stakes Trump-Putin summit in Anchorage. The talks, which shifted unexpectedly from a ceasefire to a push for a full peace agreement, have stirred concern across Europe. Leaders from Warsaw to Berlin insist nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. With security guarantees, unity and Ukraine's sovereignty at stake, we ask what Anchorage means for Europe, for Kyiv, and for the future of peace. Iuliia, welcome back. A pleasure, as always, to have you on the programme. Thank you. So, OK, let's start with big picture. Your strongest impact, or the strongest impact that you've received from the meeting in Alaska between Trump and Putin?
Well, for us, it was predictable that Trump might have shifted his position after the meeting with Putin. Because we see that Donald Trump makes statements that sometimes contradict the previous position. What was where we were hopeful, actually, because there had been very intense diplomatic talks, channel diplomacy made by the European leaders, and joint statement issued beforehand, and also the talks with Donald Trump before that. So the logic was expected to be like, let's agree on unconditional ceasefire and then talk about possible modalities for the peace settlement. And as we know, all this didn't come out. On the contrary, Donald Trump came back by saying that we don't want just interim ceasefire. We just want talks and meaningful peace settlement at the end. Second disappointment was that Trump stepped back from the position that he might impose sanctions on Russia if they are not acting in goodwill and not ready to negotiate. So basically right now, this leverage is off the agenda as far as we can see. So definitely a lot of hopes are laid for tomorrow's meeting and the joint position of Ukraine and European leaders on that.
I want to come to tomorrow's meeting in just a minute, but, you know, as you say, Trump was talking about severe economic consequences. He was talking about secondary sanctions before he went to that meeting with Putin. And then suddenly everything simply didn't matter anymore. And he's telling Ukraine to make a deal because Russia is bigger and more powerful. I mean, what caused that shift, in your opinion?
Well, it definitely was the result of his talks with Putin, the shifting of opinion, which is nowadays more aligned with Russian vision of how all this process should be handled. However, I should say that probably it was not as much frustration as we had after his meeting with Putin in Helsinki in 2021, when Trump clearly stated, I don't trust my own special intelligence agencies. I do trust Putin. He said that they didn't interfere in the elections. So this kind of complete shift of the position hasn't happened as a result of the Alaska meeting. And also we know that the whole program had been cut short and they didn't have the luncheon, they didn't have the meeting in extended format, meaning that Russians was not able to impose their vision like we have much big issues like bilateral relations, economic benefits, prosperity for both countries, and Ukraine is minor issue on the agenda. So this hasn't happened, obviously, but still this shift of the position has created a lot of complications right now, and tomorrow talks will be very intense, I guess.
Well, certainly have had complications created. Now, you touch on a very interesting point. The lunch was cancelled, but there were other elements. There were other optics, weren't there, which were, you know, some found surprising. Take, for example, the press conference. Each leader made a statement. They didn't take any questions from journalists. Why this complete lack of transparency? I mean, usually you can't stop Trump from talking. This time he didn't want to talk at all.
Yes, I think they had to wrap up the press conference because literally they had not much to say about the alignments of their position, at least, which was good. Also, the Trump resorted to quite ambiguous statements rather than referring to some concrete commitments or agreements that they reached. And because they didn't have any definite answers to sharp questions, like, for instance, addressed to Putin when he would stop killing civilians in Ukraine and whether he's ready to negotiate. So I think the sides simply were not prepared to face these straightforward questions.
Understood. Now, before I move on, one last question on the summit itself. Putin came with a whole team of business people. What does that tell you? What were his expectations, do you think?
As I mentioned, Russians were trying to use this opportunity to present to Trump that there are a lot of economic benefits lying ahead of them if they resume meaningful bilateral cooperation. And this is something that they tried to show to Trump. Take a look at the big range of different Russian businessmen presented in the delegation. But as I said, because even at the conference, there had not been much of the reference to concrete ideas that had been discussed around these bilateral potential relations, but also to the contrast that Trump said at the beginning that his main idea of these talks were to talk about ceasefire, to reach agreement with Russia about ceasefire, and then to continue with more bigger issues like bilateral cooperation. So in a way, Trump made this as a prerequisite for successful resumption of their bilateral relations, the ceasefire agreement. But because, as I said, Russian delegation were not ready to agree on that. So therefore, the sides had to opt to these very vague, non-concrete statements that they made at the press conference.
Understood. Now I'd like to move on to the European position. United, perhaps unusually united, in terms of the European country's support for Ukraine. What is different to the message that they have proposed or are going to propose tomorrow in Washington compared to what they've been saying to Trump ever since February?
Yes, I think that they would try to stick to this logic that also was expressed in the statement of coalition of the willing just before the talks as 5 essential elements, like ceasefire has to be a prerequisite to meaningful, peaceful talks, no concession and voluntary changes of internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, meaning that Russian demands that some of the territories that are occupied by Russia right now should be recognized legally as Russian territories. So this is off the agenda. Then the contact line should be the starting line of talking about the peace settlement, not swapping or giving Russia the territories that they even haven't won in the battlefield. So all these things will be restated tomorrow, I guess. And then my vision of the pragmatic, a very good outcome of this meeting would be that Trump eventually realizes that the views and approaches of both sides, Ukrainians, Europeans against Russians, they're completely different from the point what should come first, ceasefire or talks on peace settlement. And when he realizes that, then he would need to call a meeting, at least a trilateral meeting, as he promised, of Russian president, Ukrainian president, and himself, but ideally also European leaders included.
Now, well, as you say, that is a very positive outcome if we get it. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Now, a key element of the European proposal, of course, is security guarantees. What do you understand that phrase to mean?
Yes, security guarantees. If you're talking about viable or meaningful security guarantees, this would be the set of measures that could have in effect real effective deterrence of Russia, and which would make for them very painful and costly any potential invasion into Ukraine in the future when the war is stopped. So to these security guarantees should be included very strong and capable Ukrainian armed forces, Ukraine's defense industry being able to produce enough equipment together with European partners, military equipment in possession of Ukraine to defend its territory, and very strong alignment of our partners to come up with very painful sanctions in case Russia breaches agreement. So all this should comprise viable security guarantees. This is something which goes in contrast to Russian demands that they would like ideally to have Ukrainian defense forces cut short, no international military assistance to Ukraine, and no cooperation with the Western partners in military field. So this is why I think this would be the clashing point also when the sides would have a seat at the table of negotiations.
Indeed, I'm sure it will be, but they do go a bit further this time. Both Merz from Germany and the Estonian Prime Minister have both said that the security guarantees should be similar to Article 5, NATO Article 5 security guarantees, which would suggest that partners to that guarantee would put boots on the ground in Ukraine to defend it. How would that work?
Yeah, it's actually a tricky point when we talk about the guarantees of Article 5 type, because if you read Article 5, you do understand that the common denominator is that attack on one country is considered as attack on all the countries, but it doesn't contain direct obligations for each of the members of the NATO to come with their own forces and to assist the country under attack. This is the point, because each country should decide the means how it would assist the country under attack. And this is where the actually trick lies. When it comes to some contingent of our partners' troops in Ukraine, me personally, I remain quite skeptical about this idea, because we're coming back then to the question, what would be the real deterrence mechanism for Russia? And to the date, Ukrainian army is the most experienced, most advanced, most equipped when it comes to the range of equipment received from our Western partners compared to any other European army. This is why we have to consider very carefully and wisely how this cooperation in terms of manpower should be put in place.
Indeed, and of course there is the other question of what constitutes a threat that would trigger this response. So, for example, would hybrid warfare be considered enough of a threat for the guarantee to be triggered? Iuliia, unfortunately, we have to end our conversation here, but thank you, as always, for your analysis, and have a safe evening. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, though, lots more coming up. Goodbye.